Morning, guys. Hope everyone's been safe through these trying times. I got a couple requests on where to start in karate, and it's kind of cool because I was expecting most of the Patreon subscribers as current karate practitioners, right? But seems like there's a few people in here that are kind of just interested in what karate is and wanted to get their first foot in the door through the Patreon thing. So thanks for joining, and I appreciate that. So I'm extremely cold, so we're gonna see how we do this. I break down karate into like real basic techniques, right? And then from those fundamental techniques, you start bridging and you start learning the concepts which you've seen in our YouTube channel and everything like that. But what a karate person to me looks like, what makes them different from like a Muay Thai practitioner, different from like an MMA fighter or a boxer, is just like their basics, right? Their key homes. And we'll go through those and then kind of the logic of the progression of your key homes and how they should start looking, right? And for you guys who are doing karate or who have experience in martial arts, you call this kind of the foundational stuff for like a white belt, kind of like a real basic curriculum to follow, right? So first of all is your punch, of course, right? Karate guys generally punch with the other hand chambered at the belt or anywhere between this part here. I don't like it too low. I know some styles do right at the belt, other styles do around the floating rib. Whatever feels comfortable for you. I've kind of found a medium kind of in between there. My rationale is if I'm punching, and of course no one's going to be punching from down here, but if, for example, I need to chamber my punch back, most of my punches with my guard up are going to be up here, right? Very rarely I'm going to do this. Maybe after a block or a change to the angle, I'm going to do that. But even then, my chamber is a little high, right? The reason for that is the distance of travel is shorter, right? You do generate some more torque if you load your fist to your hips, which is a good idea too. So one thing we always advocate is just train everything, right? So maybe one day just work on driving your punch from your hip, another day work on driving your punch from your floating rib, even higher, I've seen. And of course, to be a little more practical, drive your punch from the guard, right? And especially with bare knuckle guards, and I'm all over the place right now, especially with bare knuckle guards, what I mean is without like huge 16-ounce boxing gloves, I usually rake my cheek with my middle knuckles here. The reason for that is I know that my hand is long enough when I open it up to protect my temple area, so this kind of covers here. I don't need to have it too high because there's nothing, if something's coming up here, it's not going to hit me anyways, but at the very least, if I get to this and I have a boxer or an ungloved, open hand, unarmed cover, it's going to be around here, around my cheek line here. I've seen some people kind of do this, but I've seen people get clipped in the temple here with a punch or a kick. So just be very aware. It's kind of a floating thing here. And when I do raise my hand to block, I am blocking kind of backwards this way rather than up and down, up and down. So something is to think about, especially an easy drill is just to be in front of a mirror. Just work on your guard and just think about a floating guard that's kind of gravitating around your head, right? So when we were teaching the kids class, I would think about a helmet, like a motorcycle helmet, that's just circulating around your head. And that way you can kind of slip through, everything works up here, and you're not trying to raise up and block like that. Anyways, going back to more traditional stuff, so with our punches, palm up here, and then it shoots out, and right at the last second it goes palm down. You want to think about like thumb out, thumb in, and that's going to help you twist your punch right at the last second. The reason for that, it adds a little more torque with the spiral and also aligns your body to be in good alignment for the point of impact, right? So imagine like you're doing a push-up on the floor. My push-up, it works when it's palm down because everything's kind of aligned when I'm pushing out here. It's gonna be hard to try to push up like that, so it doesn't make sense to try to punch with your palm up. And it doesn't make sense to try to drive from here with palm up too and try to do this. So this kind of ergonomically, anatomically, it kind of makes sense to kind of just have your hand roll out, palm up, palm down, and it feels real natural doing that. Just like you're throwing a ball, right? You're kind of here, pulls back, and this goes forward, and this goes palm down at the point of release. So you're doing that. So if you want to get into whatever stance feels natural, a fighting stance is you walk like normal, stop when one foot's in front of the other, look down, and that's usually your natural fighting stance here. And you're gonna throw punches like that from the guard, from an unarmed guard, or you can throw punches, reverse punches like this, alternating punches like that, right? And it goes palm up, palm down, palm up, palm down here. You can also just stand with your feet square. There's also like a sumo stance where your knees are pointed out. Just be mindful that you want to flare the knees out as you squat down. And notice how my back is pretty straight as I do this. I'm flaring out and everything kind of expands this way. That's going to allow you to be in a rooted stance and still be able to throw your punches. Now after your punches, after you get used to this motion here, this push-pull, like you're grabbing onto something, you're pulling, you want to start adding your hips into that, right? So in the beginning, what you're going to feel like is your shoulders are doing all the work, and your shoulders are going to get real strained. And then eventually you'll realize, like, the more you add your hip into it, your hip is what's throwing your hands forward, right? And then you're going to realize that your hips are connected to your legs, and it's most of my torque and my drive is actually from my toes, because I'm actually pushing this way. I'm digging into the ground with my toes here, and that kind of keeps me rooted. But notice how it allows me to kind of rotate back and forth on my knees here. That gives me the most amount of rotation in my hip, right? So the more flexible you are, like a bamboo, right? The more limber you are down here, the more torque you're able to generate, and the more power you're able to throw your punch with. So you could even over torque your stance by raising the heel up, right? Because if my feet are glued to the ground here and I try to throw here, even at the highest amount of turn, it's not as great of an angle as doing that. So raising my heel up adds like another 3 to 4 inches to my momentum and to my reach. So, and notice how I'm not going crazy hard with these punches. I'm just getting my body used to the movement. You always want to think like smooth as fast, right? So you have your punches here. And then you got your different blocks, right? So you have the rising block here. So I'm gonna go palm towards me. It's gonna go up like an uppercut, and it's gonna turn out this way. You don't wanna just have your arm raised up like this, because again, there's no spiraling motion. You want a little bit of torque happening. So, and plus you're loading everything on your upper shoulder, and that's gonna be straining, especially if you hit like a solid object. Doing this, it's gonna hurt versus driving through kind of like a wedge this way and then turning out. So you're gonna wedge through something and then replace it with a structure. That makes sense. And then on the other hand, the next one goes in front, wedges through, and then build a structure. Wedge through, build a structure. So that tells me for my wedge to work, I need my fist to be pretty tight, right? So you can even think about, if I just wedge this way, this entire 4 inches of my fist is going up. If it runs into an obstruction, that's like a flat surface that's gonna run into a roadblock. So even if my wedge has a little angle to it, so that this point here is what's wedging up, right? The top 2 knuckles. And I didn't mention that with the punches. You want to try to aim with the top 2 knuckles too, because your punch can also be a wedge as well, right? And there's other reasons for that, more power on less surface area, etc. So if I wedge up this way, notice how there's an angle here. This wedge can break through obstructions, and then you put a structure in there. My palm faces out. So look from the side, it goes here, 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 here. And you're gonna notice everything's in how the elbow moves. So elbow in, elbow out, elbow in, elbow out, elbow in, elbow out. And getting that extremely smooth will make you very, very efficient, right? Because a lot of people, they try to throw their fist up. They're trying to think about that, but their elbow's kind of lagging behind. If you do a block like this, that tells me you emphasize trying to think about breaking something with like the wristwatch area of your forearm. You're trying to break something through, which makes sense. But if you're like in a clinch and you kind of have to break through somebody on top of you here, it's gonna be hard to try to use your body weight with this here. It kind of makes more sense to just frame and come out. And it's kind of like doing this thing here, right? Or if you're on the ground and you pop up, notice how like everything kind of has to pop up on that motion there. So my shoulder kind of rotates out, my elbow kind of pops up, and there's my rising wall. I had to check the time, that was already 12 minutes, but now we're gonna move on to our regular middle block or inside out blocks. From here, everything's the same. I have to kind of rotate my body to the side. So most people, you're gonna start like this, square. The next blocking hand's on the outside here, outside. And notice how, again, you're gonna notice a pattern that in the beginning you're gonna be moving with your shoulders, and you're gonna be moving with your hips, and then you're gonna start moving with your whole body, right? Because I cannot, if you think of the stereotypical analogy, your body as a whip, right? If you imagine like a rope as a whip here, but then in the beginning it's just like a rope, and it's tied to a wood block, and then another rope, right? That wood block is gonna mess up the whole chain, the kinetic chain, right? So wherever you're stiff, let's say I throw my middle block here, but I notice the chain reaction here. Let's say I make this part of my hip stiff, so I'm just gonna lock this out. Notice how kind of rigid that looks. I can even make this side fluid, then it gets locked up here, and then this becomes fluid again. It's still not as powerful as making everything as loose as possible, right? So you want to think about conscious practice in the sense that know what's particular to you. So for example, I have an injury in my neck here, right? So that means it's gonna be hard for me to kind of do sudden looks and try to throw, right? Or try to throw a punch. So that might be my thing to loosen up before I do a lot of like roundhouses and stuff like that, right? So that tells me I should work on my stiffest point of my body so that every single point on the kinetic chain can be as loose as possible, and therefore you have the most amount of torque relative to you, right? So again, we have our middle blocks here, and I'm adding torque at every single thing, right? So again, it's about the elbow. So the elbow gets pulled back, and because of that, the hand follows, right? So my elbow pulls back, and it's kind of like I'm whipping whatever is up here. Like if you imagine you're throwing a frisbee, or let's say you're you have a wet towel and you're trying to flick it, right? It's all in the elbow making the wrist loose, right? If I kept my wrist straight and I just try to do that, there's gonna be no snap at the end of the towel. It's more about the elbow here, and then it's pulling in, right? So knowing that that's a loose part in my kinetic chain, I gotta figure out a way to make that as powerful as possible. So that means my entire body has to add to the pulling of the elbow here. So everything kind of has to go this way, and then it allows this to happen, right? Swing this way. This is an over exaggeration. I'm going here. I'm going to this. Right? So if I just made that movement more condensed, more efficient, so then I'm square here, and this is enough to cause that type of whip, right? Over time, your movements will get more condensed and to the point, right? It's like anything, where any repetitive motion task, like if you play an instrument, or even if you're like preparing food for dinner, right? Most people, when they start cutting with a knife, they're doing these big movements, or they're trying to chop down. And then if you watch professional chefs, they're just doing real slight, slow movements, kind of very mechanical about it. So the more you can be robotic in your movement, in the sense that it's exact and to the point and the same, consistent every single time, the more efficient you're going to be and the less energy you're going to expend, right? So, but to get there, you have to be as organic as possible. So don't feel like you need to figure out how to do this really quickly. I would rather you just work on large, gross motor movements, and then just feel like, okay, that my elbow feels good here. Where else can I make it tighter? Elbows connected to my shoulder. Maybe I'll make my shoulder tighter. So let me just emphasize the shoulder for a little bit. Shoulder feels good. Let me make this hip tighter. Cool. So now the hip's gonna be tight, shoulder's gonna be tight, elbow's gonna be tight. And that's just half of my body, right? So that means now I gotta work on pulling this back, because I know pulling this back will kind of help expand everything out this way. Notice how it kind of helps pull my shoulders back when I do that. So hip tight, shoulder tight, elbow tight, pull the other hand back. Right, and that over time is what your logical progression should be. All right, let me try to zoom past the rest of the blocks. So that was punches, high block, middle block. You have inside out middle block, and then you have your outside in, right? Everything's the same here. This one's actually pretty easy, because it feels, if you have your hand here, it kind of helps give a physical indicator of where you need to stop. And where you need to stop is right on your body line on the other side, crossing your body here. Because I can't block here and then still have the attack come into me. And I don't want to over block, because it's going to leave me vulnerable, off balance, and also if they're striking away out here, you don't have to try to hit it out of the way. I'm sure that looks funny on camera. So all I'm going to do is just use this hand here and just rep this out. If you need a pad or something, that way you don't feel that sting all the time, you can do that and get more reps in. And I'm throwing, just to help with the torque, I'm going way up here. And this allows the palm to turn all the way and face me. So it continues, it allows a full rotation of the hand here. All the way out, all the way in. And again, this is elbow emphasis. You're gonna notice everything's kind of where the elbow moves, right? And especially against another person, you're gonna realize that elbow is gonna be kind of pummeling, it's gonna be slipping, it's gonna be blocking and peeling. You have elbow strikes too, but all these things are kind of moving things out of the way, clearing over, under, up and down. And that's kind of the cool thing about all this is you're learning 4 directions of the blocks: up, out, in, down. But if you take that cross section, right, at 4, and just split it up into an infinite number of angles, then you have blocks at every angle, right? Out, in, down, cross, down, up. And then you realize that your elbow's articulating where your hand's gonna go. If my elbow points down, my hand has this, right? My elbow points up, my hand does this. So I have all these angles to block at depending on the situation. So it allows me to kind of pummel and do things like that. So outside in, and then you have your regular down block, right? So this goes just like needing to rotate the palm all the way. Now we're gonna do the opposite side, palm here and down. And again, for the rule of thumb is you don't want to pass your body line, and you don't want to block too close to your body either, because then your arm's gonna get pinned. So I still want to create like a solid structure. Think of like circles here. That's gonna allow you to hold on and brace onto something, right? So if I'm holding myself up like this, I should be able to use my anatomical structure to kind of hold myself up, right? So I'm holding like this. If I feel like I'm straining to hold myself up, it means like I'm using too much arm and I'm not using my, kind of like pull your shoulders back and down, have your back straight, use your spine. Like here, you should be able to rest forever because you're essentially using, I feel a lot of strain here in my lats and my upper shoulders and my shoulder blades here holding me up. Versus trying to do that and try to hold myself up, I start feeling a lot of strain on my upper shoulder and stuff like that. So keep that in mind. Your blocks and everything reinforces the structure. That way you can even hold this structure here and move around it without losing your footing, right? So if I had my downward block like that, I should be able to kind of just move around that down block using my structure, right? So if I'm too far forward, it's gonna be hard for me to move around it. It'll feel like I'm pushing against the wall rather than bracing against it. And if it's too close to me, then it feels like I'm really holding myself up, because anytime I try to move, I'm gonna feel like I'm gonna stumble. So there's that perfect angle away from your body that's kind of helps you settle your weight into that position. And you kind of start feeling that too. Especially if I start standing tall and try to lean into this, I'm gonna feel like I'm holding myself up, right? So you kind of have to sink and kind of settle into this framework, this structure here. And the more you can create kind of, or visualize circular structures inside your frames, the more solid your structure is gonna be, right? Because even if I'm getting a little abstract, but even if I do my round block here, and I do everything correct, just past my body line, I'm here, I feel like I blocked it, but this elbow here, you notice this, kind of pointed this way, the structure is gonna collapse. But if I imagine, watch my body expand here versus this, just that little expansion, it's gonna hold this structure up. And you could test these structures, right? If I just lean against this, my structure is gonna collapse this way. But if I just expand out, and that structure is gonna hold, kind of like, I say this often, it's like doing a plank. If you're doing a plank on the ground, even with a round block here, if I keep my structure low and this thing's gonna collapse. You can't even notice my hands starting to shake. When I just keep this structure up like that, it's gonna kind of help me hold me up a little easier. And that's gonna allow you to brace against things a lot easier too, right? A lot further, for a longer duration. Cool? And what's cool about that is once you start bracing against something with this part of your torso, it allows this part to pivot. And that's where the swings and everything happens, right? So if I'm bracing here, this allows me to swim underneath somebody's arm, or I brace up here, this allows me to swim underneath. I brace down here, this allows me to swim through, right? So all these kind of like circular movements where you brace here and you can start moving around, you brace here and you start moving around. It kind of allows you to put up a structure, a frame against a resistance, and then manipulate your body around that frame, right? Or through that frame. So those are basic blocks: punch, high block, middle block, round block, down blocks. And I'll try to be more consistent with these videos. It's been pretty hectic over here, but I appreciate all the support, and hopefully you guys are still training. Take care.